I am your host, Craig Pasta Jardula, of course, here with my trusted colleague and friend, Fiorella Isabel. How you doing, Fee?
God, I'm doing well. It's just a journey of traveling. It's been a lot of traveling lately, and I'm not done. So I'm glad to be back here. Actually, the weather's quite nice compared to Florida.
Well, where are you? You got to let everybody know where you're at.
Oh, I'm in Moscow. I'm in Moscow again.
Moscow, really?
Yes, Moscow. But I am here for now, and I was actually near Sochi, let's just say, for a little bit. Yeah, it was nice. It was beautiful.
Well, listen, fam, we didn't do a show much. You were traveling around. You still got a lot of traveling ahead of you. So do I. We got a lot of things going on. I don't even know. I didn't even check back up on what's going on in Bolivia over there. I don't even know if
It's bad. That's what's going on. Yeah. We'll have to talk to Camilla, but it's from what I'm seeing, it's just.
Is she there right now?
Yeah. It's not good. It's what's expected. I mean, Yeah. So we'll have to. That's a whole other thing we'll have to talk about. But yeah, Latin America, by the way, is next on the what is it, the chopping block, as you
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
I don't know if that's what you would call it, but yeah, it sounds like something we would call it. So Jamie Cheese Slice is not here. He'd probably be stopping in every once in a while. What's up, Applejack? Good to see you, brother. Congratulations on your new child. Seems like people are having babies out there. That's kind of cool. So congratulations to you, my friend.
Who's having a child?
Applejack's just had a baby.
Oh,
So yeah.
okay.
So yeah. A couple people have babies and stuff. So gonna continue to have babies. Congratulations to those having babies out there. Unfortunately, Israel won't stop killing babies.
Yeah.
That stuff is just ridiculous, fam. I mean, obviously, we're going to provide some context to what's going on in Alaska, but I think we always keep our eye on the bigger picture. And regardless of anything, whatever happens, yeah, obviously, we'd like to see something calm down over in the Ukraine-Russia side of the world. But it doesn't seem like it's calming down in Gaza. And it's like every day I go to one of the places I go to first is antiwar.com just to see how many Palestinians are killed. And it always seems in an average of about 24 hours, they're killing an average of about 125 Palestinians every day. Every day that's going on. And no matter what, that doesn't seem to be calmed down. In fact, if this situation ends over here in Russia, Ukraine, fam, there's a lot of talk that a lot of the mercenaries that are in Ukraine will go over to Gaza to help them, the Israelis, secure the gas lines, the natural gas that's off the shore, and start helping, provide cover to the shoreline so they can sew that up, I should say, the Zionists. But fam, we had this amazing thing. I mean, the New York Post, by the way, I have it over here. You can see they provided, I don't know if the blur,
it's a little blurry.
The blur.
Start of the deal, it says.
Yeah. Start of the deal. So, I mean, they kind of framed it in a good way. Obviously, that's the network, the outlet that's going to protect Donald Trump a little bit more. That's the New York Post. They're the ones who made a stink about the Hunter Biden laptop, right? They were trying to provide cover for Donald Trump. So they're doing it. The Sun Sentinel, which is the local paper in Florida, in South Florida, doesn't even have anything about Russia, Ukraine on the Sunday paper on the cover and the front section, which is just, it tells you a lot about what's going on. For me, watching the mainstream media do what they do, anything, the conservative media, obviously, they want to huff and puff and put their chest up about Donald Trump still being tough to Putin. Fam, I don't know if you knew he flew a B-1 bomber across. That seemed what got Hannity going and a lot of people over on Fox. But the Democratic constituents, or I should say, what do you call them? Stenographers of the Democratic Party, that media, they are just anything. Their starting point is World War III. It's like almost like he can't be good. They're still questioning, how come you haven't sanctioned him more? They want to ignore the fact that the sanctions actually had an adverse effect. They didn't really work for them. And in fact, if you look at what Russia's doing now, financially, their ruble is up. The ruble, it's up. It's up. It's up big. Their GDP, their growth has been awesome. And, you still have people, talking this language that they're about to fall. We got to keep hitting them with sanctions. Donald Trump is being Putin's puppet. But fam, why don't you make light of all this whole situation? Because I think there's like a lot of gray areas for this situation. I mean, all in all, what grade would you give it as far as positivity for war ending or relationships moving forward?
Well, it's hard to get that from me because I'm looking at this completely different, I think, than most people are. I think most people are looking at this as, yay, Russia has obviously, they've won the military war, right? They obviously have. I mean, they've secured the majority of the areas that they wanted to secure. They have attained the world on their side in terms of who has the right to justify what they're doing. NATO is weakened and effectively collapsed. Europe is basically done. And those are the realities on the ground. Russia has simultaneously also made connections with the people in East Asia, with China, with Southeast Asia, with India, with all of BRICS, obviously the global South in general, and has their ties and their many objectives in the Middle East also at work. When you look at it that way, obviously Russia has the upper hand and has gone into this as a strong player. I think Russia also made the United States realize that they are actually would be a more powerful entity, a more powerful, sovereign country to have on their side. However, the US has never respected anybody's sovereignty. Somebody that could potentially compete and, in a way, overcome them or overpower them is not something they like to see, which is why we've seen the continuous animosity before towards the Soviet Union and now towards Russia. And the problem with that is Europe can no longer defend anything, and that's very clear. So I think what we're seeing here is Washington's shift in strategy from the confrontational approach to Russia towards a more friendly approach to Russia, just pragmatically based on what they can get out of Russia. This entire time since the first meeting on, I believe it was February of this year, that meeting basically signaled the conversation being about economic cooperation between Russia and the United States. And people are rarely talking about that, the economic aspect to all of this, which is pretty much everything that drives the war. That and resource extraction, as you said, which is extremely economic as well. And so what we're looking at here is a good deal for Russia in the moment in terms of what they could potentially get out of this. Obviously, Ukraine isn't even in the picture, and that's been very apparent with the meetings between Trump and other officials in Russia and completely ignoring Zelensky. It's obvious that they're a proxy. So this pretty much cemented that thought process that Zelensky is nothing but a proxy and a puppet. And so now what you have is you had Vladimir Putin talking to Donald Trump in Alaska, which to many Americans who are completely illiterate when it comes to geography were surprised to see that Russia and Alaska on the other end, right, are almost touching. This is why Sarah Palin was actually not that dumb when she said that, because it's actually they're actually quite close, right? And so, and it was very symbolic because Alaska has that past, and Russia has toyed with the idea of we should get it back, we should get it back. So there's a lot of symbolics going into that on the more cosmetic level. But then this whole thing, in my opinion, was a theatrical display of things that have already been discussed between the United States and Washington, because Stephen Witkoff has been going to Russia and has been having conversations with Putin, with Lavrov, and with other high-level diplomats in Russia for a long time, this entire year. So now we're almost in September, and these conversations have been ongoing. They've never stopped, despite the fact that, Putin said this, Trump said that, and Trump is going back on his word, all of this. It is my belief that the deals that we have yet to hear about, which is why they were very tight-lipped about the whole thing, have already been cemented. They have already been talked about, and that these deals have much more to do with the Middle East than they do with Ukraine itself, which is an effective lost cause for NATO. And so now what you're going to see is Zelensky, who is meeting with Trump later today for you guys' time. And that is basically just going to be like, Zelensky has to agree to this, because otherwise, there's not going to be a Zelensky. I think Trump has sort of made it clear that that's where they're going with this, that you should agree to what Putin is saying. That basically means you have to, or else, in the way we speak in Washington. And then you're going to see another meeting happen. And I'm not sure if in Moscow, but that's kind of like where they're going. But I think that would just be like the continuation. I don't think it's going to happen like overnight, but I do think that they're serious about this. And I know we've had, Mark Sloboda on, we've had conversations with different analysts that have said, Russia doesn't need to do this. Russia has the upper hand. Why would they even want to stop this war? Because, from a military perspective, they're winning, which is true. They're winning. But at the same time, Russia is a pragmatic player. And a lot of people don't understand when I say this. They are not an ideological government. That is no longer the truth. They are a pragmatic government that seeks to not make enemies, but seeks alliances with everybody. And you can criticize that on many ends, or you can say that's a good thing as well. But the reality is they're trying to make alliances with everybody at this point, including the United States. And it would be beneficial to them from their point of view to secure their assets, to secure their objectives in expanding economically to make deals with the United States. Part of that is the Arctic. Part of that is Ukraine's resources and also the resources in the Donbass. And the other part of that is the resources in the Middle East, including Syria. And Israel is also involved in all of this because Israel has lobbied to the US Congress so Russia could keep its bases in Syria. I've been talking about this with Vanessa on our show, Critical Perspective. And so these are the things that are happening. And if people think that this is just about Russia, Ukraine, you're sort of missing the entire picture of all of the things that are happening in the background. And that's where I'd like to go with this. Any thoughts, Pasta, first on everything that I just said or whatever?
Well, yeah, obviously there are a lot of things. I think that it's great that, there's a lot of analysts out there like yourself that can really concentrate on what's going on. Obviously I kind of pay more attention to the perspective from the voter, from the citizenry. Obviously, I'm swimming in those waters. And you're right, fam. A lot of people just don't understand what's going on. I think they need to look at a map and start identifying where certain places are. Find Ukraine on that map. It's crazy how you hear people repeat. Like I have my cousin, I was talking to her, we were talking about this whole situation because she called me, says, isn't this a good thing if this happens? Isn't this going to be really good? I said, yeah, it's going to be great if it does happen. But, I don't know what is going to happen. And I'm a little hesitant. She goes, well, I think Trump has done a really good job because Putin has been unreasonable at times. And I said, well, can you tell me how he's been unreasonable? Well, they said that, he's about to make a deal, that he continues to bomb people. I said, he's in the middle of a war over there. His country's in war. I mean, obviously he had to protect those people. Do you understand why we went to, why he went to war in the first place and what our involvement is? And people just have no idea. They have no clue. And I think something that's not understood too as well is that, yeah, Ukraine is there. I think you mentioned the economics were very important because they drive everything. And I think at the end of the day, Donald Trump, really, I don't know if he has a lot of pull in what he can do, but if he did have a lot of pull, he'd be paying attention to the economics because that's all he does pay attention to, the real estate dealer, right? And you did mention Zelensky today. I don't know what's going to happen with that whole situation. Anna Rigwall put up over here too as well. It's kind of funny. She put this up here. MSNBC, right? Mainstream media is saying Zelensky is an important figure. When you kind of just mentioned he really doesn't have a say in what's going on, he's going to be told you're going to have to do this, and that's that. But I also think that despite the way the mainstream media is handling this, despite there might be another meeting in Moscow, I think people are kind of leaving off the table that I think there's an urgency for the Russian Federation and Vladimir Putin to bring conversations back to nuclear treaties as well. I kind of felt like that was evident in this meeting. Is there a kind of like a push to, hey, let's get back on the table and get these treaties signed about our nuclear weapons? Did you feel like that was brought to the table here in Anchorage, Alaska, fam?
Not really. I mean, we didn't really hear much of what was brought to the table except what they allowed people to hear, because remember they canceled the press conference. I think Russia definitely doesn't want a nuclear war. I mean, they're very much economically driven. So is China. Like they're very much driven on just developing their economies and continuing to compete with the US. And now that we're coming into the age of the fourth industrial revolution, when we're talking about these minerals that we need for technology and AI and all of this stuff, like that definitely comes into play. And Russia's really much going on board with all of that. I mean, they're accelerating that race with AI. Every sort of conference that I've been to here, whether it's the St. Petersburg Economic Forum or the BRICS, it really had a huge focus on technology, AI, and how to get things to a more digital level, which I don't think Russia is where we are perhaps in Europe or in the US necessarily, but in some aspects they are, and they want to compete with China and the US on that. I think that's mostly their focus on actual economic cooperation. I think that was mostly the focus. I obviously think that they're going to want their security guarantees, which is, like Ukraine cannot be a part of NATO and we get to keep the Donbass, and Crimea shouldn't even be discussed, but it's obviously being discussed, and there's no way they're going to give up on that, on Crimea. So but when it comes to some of the things we'll talk about in a second, there are some potential things that Russia could give in order for there to be peace, which will make it look like Putin is giving in something. But make no mistake that I'm sure that Putin is getting something else in return that's not being talked about, because they're, again, coming from a position of power. And I just got to say, like, you're talking about this from a voter perspective, right? Is this a good thing for the world? It's a good thing that we're not going into nuclear war, yes. But is this because Trump is some sort of amazing diplomat that he thought about doing this himself? No, this is what the new US deep state objective is. They want Russia to be a powerful player, but that can sometimes be on their side. And this is what people weren't expecting, I think, because they've taken the position that Russia's just going to go destroy the West with Iran and China, and the trifecta are just going to go and, unleash, hell all over the US and Europe. And that's not even how Russia ever operates ever. So that's not even real. And also the United States has had to shift this because there are more powerful players than before in China and Russia and even Iran. And so now they've had to shift this, but that doesn't mean that their end objective is not to go back to this later. So for me, and I'm one of the people that would most benefit for multiple reasons, that, for this war to end. It's just tedious traveling back and forth. It's tedious for visa purposes, for all of these things, sanctions, money transfers, and all of that. But what I am saying is that even if this stops now, Russia needs to tread cautiously, because I just don't feel like there is a genuine attempt to really make Russia, an equal partner, respected in this way. I think what it is, the U.S. pragmatically, geopolitically trying to manipulate the situation in their favor, so it doesn't look like the failure that it is. Because Ukraine has been a failure for the United States, absolute, an abysmal failure for Europe and NATO. So now they're trying to position it into something else.
Well, let's get the ball rolling on what we have in the dock. I will definitely say this much, that I think it is great that, I thought it was so stupid when you look at the kabuki theater in front of us, whether you believe it to be true or not true, fam. I still say at the end of the day, there is an empire over here trying to expand, working with Israel, what I'm saying, to expand together. So even if it is like kind of stuff going on behind closed doors, fam, right? Like where you say there's no roses, I still like put everything out there and then say, well, the United States imperialist actions are the reasons why we're here to begin with in the first place. That's the behavior we need to correct first. Then we can worry about everything after. I think it is good that, Donald Trump went and met with Putin and stuff. I'm saying? I think that's what we should be doing, even though that's not what, obviously the majority of the lawmakers in this country wanted. But I also did, fam, I thought that something was going to come out of this bigger than has already happened. It's going to be a stepping stone, obviously. But I'm waiting for Operation Obnoxiousness when it does happen, and all those Trump people are going to say, the peace president, the art of the deal. You just had to be patient, fam. Look what he's done. And that's going to allow them to turn a blind eye on all the other bullshit he's going to do. And it's going to be, I talked about it with Misty on her show, and she was on the radio with me the same day last Wednesday, how obnoxious it's going to be. The art of the deal will be back after this deal, and it's going to be ridiculous. Let's get into this. Fam, what do we have over here with this right here?
So this is my opinion on what Peskov said, but we'll hear what he says first. So he said that Trump demonstrated an unusual approach to solving difficult issues, which he said is receiving much praise in Moscow, and it is in the political circles, let's say, and personally from President Putin. He added that Moscow prefers resolving the conflict in Ukraine through political and diplomatic means. We see the mutual political will between the two presidents. So then I talked about my problem with this. So let's hear what he said first, and then I'll talk about what I mean. President Trump is demonstrating an unprecedentedly unusual approach to solving the most difficult issues, which is receiving quite high praise from Moscow and President Putin personally. President Putin always repeats that for us, it is preferable to resolve the Ukrainian conflict through political and diplomatic means. And President Trump seems genuinely interested in helping that happen. In this case, we see the mutual political will of the two presidents to resolve these issues through dialogue. President Trump is demonstrating an unprecedentedly, okay. So he basically said that they are taking Trump on his word, right? They're taking Trump essentially as being genuine about this. But what I am saying is that Trump had to be the guy to put this out there, because it wasn't going to be Biden, right? Biden was the one that even Trump now is saying, oh, that's Biden's war. It's Biden's war. And later on in the conference, Vladimir Putin said, yeah, this wouldn't have happened if you were president. And there are several layers to that.
Yeah.
What
Can we talk about that real quick?
Yeah.
That is Putin just right. That is so Putin just throwing a biscuit to Donald Trump. He's like providing cover. He's like, I'll scratch your back. You scratch mine. He said that because that's something even Sean Hannity pointed out almost immediately after Putin said it, right? Like, we said this before. He's trying to end Biden's war. And Putin even said right there that if he was the president, this is just one leader throwing. This is how good Putin is. This is how good Putin is, because you don't know that. He doesn't know that for sure, right? Like, nobody really knows what would have happened. But to say that was completely Putin throwing a biscuit to Donald Trump there. And I don't know. It's really hard for people not to see that and say, you can't see that. Like, that's a statement he can't really make with 100% accuracy. But to say that, you know what I'm saying? I thought that was a big diplomatic thing he did.
Yeah, but I honestly think it's more than that, because there are several layers that add to that. And it's not just Putin. It's the entirety of the political, I would say, the political people, the political class, the political aspects in Russia that tend to favor the Republicans to the liberals. Why? Well, because the liberals were the ones that really this began under, if you're looking at it in that way. But the reality is, all of this happened with multiple parties, both parties, which are the uniparty. And in many cases, Vladimir Putin has come out and said, we know that the U.S. changes presidents, but necessarily the foreign policy doesn't. So I know Putin's aware of this. So to a degree, you're right. Like, he's aware of it, but he's saying this. But I think that there's still some sort of belief that the United States can be some sort of partner, some sort of ally, some sort of something. There's still the belief that you can fix this, that this can be fixed, that there isn't a need to revamp the government or criticize it. These people, they're not, revolutionaries. They're not anti-establishment. They're pro-establishment. They want order. They don't like chaos. They want resolutions to things. And they're very much, the real politic of it is just resolving the thing and moving on so we can just grow and benefit. But the United States doesn't operate from that thought process. They don't operate from a win-win situation, specifically Donald Trump. They operate from, I win and you lose, and I win and you lose, and that's that. Like, there's no mutual beneficial partnerships in the long run. We don't care to have our allies succeed. Not really. As long as they can, we have some sort of power of control. And the only way that would change is if our government entirely changed. But our government hasn't changed. We've just changed, from the donkey to the elephant. And that's so my whole assessment of that is, I still think that there are layers in the political class in Russia that don't understand how the West, how the United States in particular operates, and that are so, there's a naivety to it that I think continues to be hopeful that they can somehow work something out, when in reality, we are not operating in good faith. We are not genuine. Trump genuinely just needs this to make him look good. Yeah. And the establishment knows that. But they also know that someone else down the line can go around and take it hit. And the reason I say this is because of the Moldova, the Georgia, the Azerbaijan and Armenia attacks, the surrounding of Russia in these multiple areas are setting up the stage for an eventual later rehashing of this whole thing. So even
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
All right. So here's the thing. The reason why Putin's people, I don't want to say people, but I see some of these figures that I've seen them, some of the stuff, like obviously the Alexander Dugins, right? The way he made a tweet the other day that, oh, we loved you, Trump and whatnot, and all this other BS. But I have seen a couple other, political people kind of swing towards being more pro-Trump than Joe Biden. And I'm not talking about I feel like there was a bunch of people that were like so done with the Democrats that were leftists that were like, let's at least take our chances with Donald Trump. If there's a small possibility he's an outsider, at least he's going to get things done for the benefit of civil liberties, free press, censorship. That he would be better at that than at least the Democrats because they're so far off the chart. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about those people who seem to be more religious, more anti-woke.
Yeah.
I would assume
that's my next point.
That, when people say, "Oh," a lot of the arguments, the way the Democrats get their constituents to go to be anti-Putin is to say he's anti-gay, right? And they're like, "Oh, Putin's anti-gay," but I think it's more about the culture being a little bit more conservative. Yeah. Is it the anti-woke kind of movement that's also making people lean towards Donald Trump in Russia?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. 100%. I mean, I think for a lot of the people and the analysts that get, pushed on, like the Scott Ritters, who Scott was just here not too long ago, and a few other people, they come from that anti-woke, like the Democrats suck. The Democrats are so woke that they're so this and that. And that kind of aligns with Putin's government, which is pretty much a more religious government, a more critical government of the LGBTQ whatever because there's several letters now that have been added. So the gay trans issues, the I would say they're more focused on the family thing, the religious values, traditional family values. And so when they're looking at that and they look at the US and they see, oh, well, at least the Republicans are against that stuff. We can align with that. We align with this nationalism, just pride. Because when Russia does it, it's pride in everything they've gone through. I mean, the country has never been a conquered people, but they've always been at war, right? It's a high price they've been paying. If you look at Russian history, it's just constant struggles and victories, yes, but also a lot of struggles. And if you look at the U.S., our pride comes from the idea of just conquering. And so I don't think the two are the same, but from a more cosmetic, place, then they can see, okay, these things are similar. The problem is they're not. And so making those connections as if that they are is kind of not getting the whole picture. This is what I mean. There's like a lack of understanding about that just because, the Democrats are idiots and they're terrible and they're warmongers doesn't mean these other people are on your side. And there was a video that came up recently of Putin saying that a long time ago when he was much younger, saying that at one way or another, Russia always aligns with the Republicans. And it's like, but that's Putin and his government. There are a lot of other people in Russia that don't agree with that. A lot of people in Russia, especially the younger generations, that are much more liberal in their thought process. So you kind of have, it's difficult because you have those things going on. And then you have, one of the reasons people do criticize Putin is because he's too strict on that, right? And it's not just the people, outside of Russia, it's even the people within Russia, the younger generations that are more liberal, that have an affinity for, say, Europe. And a lot of Russians have an affinity for Europe. People in Moscow in particular feel a strong affinity towards Europe. They feel themselves, many of them, to a degree that Europeans. So you have that whole thing, but then you have the rest of Russia, which is extremely Asian. And so it's kind of difficult for us to understand that there are various dynamics. But what is presented right now in terms of the political class, then yeah, they 100% have more of an affinity to Republicans because the Republicans tend to, in many ways, align with the religious aspect. But that's not the only thing. That's just like a tiny thing. You have to look at everything else.
One of the episodes, I don't know if it was the West Wing or it was the one with Kevin Spacey. I think it was the one. Was it the one with Kevin Spacey? I don't remember. They both wanted to make Putin look like a thug. Like they had characters that, the Russian president made him look like a thug, a drunk, and obviously
even drink.
What's that?
He doesn't even drink.
Yeah, I know that's what they made him look like, a thug, drunk, and just crazy guy in the Kevin Spacey one. But I think there was an argument like where, it's like, I think and I don't know if this was the West Wing, but it was like the United States government going, yeah, but we can't do this because you're anti-gay. And the Russian president was like, dude, I'm not anti-gay. I got 2 people in my cabinet are gay. It's, what I'm saying? It's just that I can't do this. If I come out and I'm pro-LGBT like you guys are, my citizens overturn me. They're too conservative. They don't want that there. They're not anti-gay. There are gay clubs in Moscow, but we just don't have gay pride parades where the kids can see that shit. So it's not, and it kind of, and I've always kind of like, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of interesting because I'm sure that they're not as like anti-gay as the American, left makes them out to be. It's just a different society. It's a very conservative, culturally conservative. I mean, but economic wise, they have more left programs, centralized power as far as healthcare and education and, infrastructure and those sort of things. They don't hand it off to the private sector. What is this over here, fam, that you got going on?
Oh, okay. So before we go to that, I just want to quickly, I think we pretty much talked about everything else in terms of what I wrote there, but I do think that they're going to revisit, this question when it comes to the Ukraine issue. I think there's a lot going on there. So this is about what the media has been going on and on about these government papers that were found, and they were found in an Alaskan hotel, revealing the details of what went on during this Alaska summit. And they were making a big deal about this, like, oh, this is a security breach. How could this possibly happen? And the papers had, the State Department markings, and they had the State Department like insignia and all this stuff. And it basically just was like what you would call like a brochures and the list of the coming meetings at the times and what was going to go on. And it was 8 pages of this. They even had like pictures of how to pronounce each Russian official that was there and all of that. And it was a mess because Alaska, this is like the high tourist season in Alaska. And there were literally no hotels for the Russian journalists to stay at. So they put them in like a stadium where people had triage for COVID. So they were sleeping on cots, and the food looked like crap, like absolute crap. And then because the Russians got in at the last minute, some of the European journalists received hotel rooms and better food. So there was kind of this tiff there, but it really wasn't about that. It was the fact that there were literally no hotels anywhere because this is high tourist season in Alaska. And so, there wasn't much of a security breach, but this is all the media has been talking about. Look, this is what was going to happen. Now, something that is interesting to point out, there was supposed to be a luncheon after that was going to have Trump sit with Rubio and with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and with also Witkoff and then Lavrov with Putin, but that lunch was canceled and then they just left. So that was an interesting thing that happened. And I really quickly, Pasta, just want to go over what actually happened. I don't know if you can pull it up on Telegram, but
let me see if I can.
If you're not logged in, you may not be able to. But I'll go ahead and quickly go over, because from Putin's perspective, he thought the discussions were constructive and beneficial, and Putin usually wouldn't say that if it wasn't. He emphasized that Alaska was a fitting location for the summit, highlighting, like I said, the geographical proximity of Russia and the U.S. as neighbors. Upon meeting Trump, Putin said he welcomed him as a neighbor Putin expressed gratitude to the U.S. for its commemoration of Soviet soldiers buried in Alaska. So Putin after went to see the Soviet soldiers that were buried there at the cemetery. He did acknowledge that the relations have been at the lowest point since the Cold War. He said that there was now an established, direct, strong communication with Trump. He confirmed that Ukraine was a central topic of the summit's agenda because before they have not always talked about Ukraine. And this is the first meeting since 2022 between Trump and a U.S. president. I mean, between Putin and a U.S. president since the war started. So Putin also said that Russia is very much interested in resolving the crisis and wants to contribute to security guarantees also for Ukraine. I haven't heard him say that before. So in regard to the security guarantees for Ukraine. So I think that's interesting. He also expressed hope that with understandings reached with Trump, there could have a way towards peace. He urged Kiev and European nations not to hinder the progress, which is they're already doing that. He highlighted that trade has grown under Trump, bilateral trade between Russia and the United States. I think this is very interesting because he also said they have much to offer each other in technology and Arctic cooperation. So like I said, the Arctic is playing a clear role in this, and also technology, which I think that's a huge portion of this, which, by the way, Russia is already trialing cancer vaccines, mRNA ones, as we speak. Now, Putin also thanked Trump for the confidential and respectful tone. He expressed hope that they could reach this, blah, blah, blah. He said, yeah, there would be no war in Ukraine likely had Trump been president at the time. The better it will be as soon as this war ends. Now, Trump also said this was a productive meeting. He's going to meet with Zelensky, that there has been substantial progress in the negotiations. He said that many things had already been agreed upon and expressed optimism for more agreements. He clarified that the current outcome was not a finalized deal, and said that all parties involved, I guess the consent of Ukraine essentially is needed. And Trump said that a visit was possible despite political criticism. That was interesting. I don't know if you caught that, Pasa, when Putin invited him. And he was like, yeah, that, they.
No, at the very end, he goes, oh, that I can get a lot of heat for that. Like, he goes, yeah. Moscow. I thought it was awesome. Once again, Vladimir Putin in English, in fucking English, and I have your tweets up when you're ready. In English was like, we'll go Moscow next, right? And he's like, oh, that was great. And you could see Trump was like, oh, that's awesome. Wait, I'm going to get a lot of heat for that, you know? And it's kind of crazy because that comment at the very end has kind of stirred up a lot of stuff with the media and the independent media, the people out here, like the Jeffrey Sachses and the other people who are like a little bit more concerned and want peace. They're a little nervous about that comment because that comment says he's more concerned about those in power, the power structure, than actually just taking the country and running it and actually.
Well, of course he is.
Huh?
It's Trump. Of course he is. Trump isn't running the show. That's the thing people need to understand. Trump's not running the show. If he's doing this, it's because he's being allowed to do this.
Yeah.
But whereas Biden, of course, wasn't going to be able to do that, and for many reasons, not just because he wasn't allowed to, but he wasn't the designee. But with a Republican president, you get that, affinity with like, oh, they're a Christian nation, they're this or that, like, and then you there's so many other layers to that, but that's part of it. Of course, Trump is concerned because he's not the one that's ultimately calling the shots, and people need to understand that. Once you understand that, then you understand why he would say something like that. Because maybe if it were up to him, sure, it would benefit him because he'll look like the peacemaker. He's going to look like somebody that's going to bring order into Biden's war and Biden's chaos and Biden's this, right? But this is also, again, distracting from the fact that Donald Trump is also part of this ongoing genocide in Gaza, the ongoing chaos in West Asia, Middle East, and that whole thing. Okay, so we can go ahead and put the tweets up, fam.
Let's do that. We'll add them right here.
Okay, so again, as I stated in the beginning, I'm not convinced that all these issues weren't discussed because, again, they really didn't reveal very much. Putin, I think, spoke for like 7 minutes and Trump spoke for like a couple. Putin spoke a lot longer than Trump and basically said, all the things he said. in this conference, and they didn't allow any questions, and the journalists kind of like were frowned upon because they sort of started shouting and freaking out, and it was interesting. But yeah, so the meeting lasted 3 hours, so they obviously talked about a lot of things, and I think in particular, like I said, it was economic. We don't know, but based on what's going on and the visits happening after all of this, that I find that very suspect. Now, again, there are many analysts who have said that Russia doesn't want, to stop yet, and I disagreed with that. And I just, it seems like what's happening now proves them wrong, because I think we're going to continue going in this. And the pictures, guys, the pictures of them together, the whole thing, it's obviously, look, nothing in politics like this happens out of nowhere. Everything is planned. When you talk about the logistics of bringing people from Russia all the way to the United States, even if it's Alaska, there's a lot of logistics involved. There's a lot of visas that need to be made. There's a lot of things that the logistics of it just don't happen overnight. So obviously it was planned to a degree, and I don't think a lot of people outside of them and the top circles knew that it was a planned thing, that it was going to be this thing. But I can tell you that in Russia, the planning of this, people were freaking out on the political level. They knew it was going to be a major thing. It was different than any other meeting that I've seen before, where it was like, oh, the Istanbul things, they were talks, blah, blah, blah. But this is being looked on as the beginning of the end of the Ukraine war, at least in this facet. So that's primarily what I want to point out about that I think that, there's a reason why we didn't hear everything, because I think they don't want people to hear everything. I think that there's a lot more that's being talked about behind closed doors that we're not privy to, obviously. And then the other tweet is the meeting has ended with a win for Russia, right? But don't pretend the U.S. isn't getting something out of this, right? Because in the long run, it is. Because what this will do is will cement Trump as being this peacemaker diplomat. What this could ultimately do is start a relationship between the United States and Russia that's actually positive. Now, when you look at it that way, it's positive for Russia and the United States to not be, at nuclear war. But when you look at it from the other perspective of what does that mean for Russia, it means you're going to have an economic relationship with the United States. And anybody that has an economic relationship with the United States doesn't end well, ultimately. And that's what I think that they have to watch out for, right? That I think that the U.S. has offered Russia something. And I think this is, again, going to circle back. But when we talk about what's happening in the Middle East, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this is going to come into play. Like right now, Lebanon is being attacked by the same forces that were in Syria, and they're threatening, they're threatening Hezbollah, basically saying that if Hezbollah doesn't get out, that they're going to come in and attack. And Hezbollah isn't going to get out. I mean, they're just like, I would even say they're more militant than many, than Hamas and others. Like, they're very much part of the resistance. And what this is going to do is it's going to open up more of an ability to sow chaos there. And what, I don't know if you've been following, Pasta, but there's been information that's come out as to how basically Russia stepped aside in Syria and had long been allowing Syria to turn to be essentially taken over by the Saudis. And immediately after the meeting, meeting in Oman, which not Oman, it was the meeting in that happened right before Damascus fell. Right after that, soon after the embassies in Syria switched that were in Russia, they switched it to the new Syrian flag. There was a huge, there have been several visits between Russian officials and Syrian officials, including Jolani, going there. And there's clearly something going on in the Middle East, which I would just simplify it by saying, Russia is keeping its bases in Syria. It's opening up, it's having its bases also in where Libya was. And all of that, right? This is, again, I think that Ukraine issue, the U.S. wants to wrap it up right now, wants to just make it look like it's not as bad of a loss, that it's a win. Look at what Trump did. Look at all of this stuff. And, for Russia, what I'm seeing here is, oh, it's so great. We can come together. We're brotherly nations. We can have this hoorah, blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of I've talked about this many times, this affinity for Westerners, for the approval of Westerners. And it's almost to me, it's like groveling a little bit, like how they just grovel for a lot of like these Americans. And it's like, I don't get it. And I see this reoccurring theme, not just in Russia, but all over Latin America, all over the Middle East. It's this whole like approval seeking, in spite of the fact that, yes, we're fighting you because you basically tried to take over our government, you tried to destroy us. In spite of the fact, they still seek like this sort of approval. And I think that is a very dangerous tactic to be operating with. So, and on those terms, we'll see what happens. I don't know if you have anything to say on all of that.
Well, you were talking about some of the stuff in the media. I wanted to put up, this whole situation with, the way the left is acting.
Mhm.
I mean, it's ridiculous. They're making, Rubio look like a peace person. Watch this clip over here. This is probably the most played clip out there, whatnot. They grab a clip of Rubio saying years ago that you can't, negotiate with a guy like Putin. And now they're like, why are you negotiating with Putin? And why hasn't Trump slapped more sanctions on? It's mind-boggling to me. I mean, what do the Democrats think is going to happen? And when people go follow this narrative that Putin is the worst awful person in, the face of the earth, what do they think is going to happen? Between the two countries combined, that's like 90% of the nuclear weapons on this planet. Why would we want to put ourselves in a position like this? This is Rubio and Welker. Watch this, fam.
What will Russia have to give up? What concessions will Russia, the aggressor, have to make as a part of this peace agreement?
Well, that's what these negotiations are about. And as you can imagine, everybody goes into a negotiation wanting 100% what they want. That includes Ukraine, but obviously the Russians. And the only way to reach a deal on anything, whether it's in business or in politics or in geopolitics, the only way to reach a deal is for each side to get something and each side to give something. And that's been very difficult. If it was easy, this wouldn't have been going on for 3.5 years. Understand, the longer these wars go on, the harder they are to end, unfortunately, because one side is always looking for leverage on the other. In this particular case, the Russian side as well. So I think that's the core of what we're trying to work through here. That's why Zelensky's coming tomorrow. That's why European leaders are coming tomorrow. That's why the president called them from the airplane, spent 2 hours in the middle of the night talking to them. And that's why we've been engaged with them every step of the way, is we are trying to find what can we get to that both sides can agree on. And it's been difficult. This is a hard issue set, but we're dedicating a lot of time to it. And the president deserves credit for dedicating time to it.
And I understand that these negotiations are ongoing, but can you name one thing that President Trump is asking Russia to give up in order to get peace?
Well, I'm not going to disclose those things, because if we do, then you can imagine the negotiations could fall apart. These negotiations, look, I know everybody wants to know what's happening, and to a certain degree that's important. But what's more important is that these negotiations work.
I want to play something you said about President Putin. This was right after the invasion in March of 2022. Take a look.
This guy lies, habitually lies. He's never kept a deal he's ever signed, and he lies all the time. And I don't know why, but he plays this like a violin in the West, because the West wants to believe that you can cut a deal with everybody. You can't cut a deal with guys like this. He's a professional, experienced liar.
Mr. Secretary, given that, what makes you think that if you are able to reach a deal with President Putin, that he would stick to it, based on, as you just said, he's a liar?
Well, that's the point. That's why the deal has to have enforceable mechanisms in it. That's why the deal has to have things like security guarantees. That's the point I was making a few minutes ago when you were asking me about looking someone in the eye. What's important here is actions, not words, not paper, document. Those are all important. Those are elements of a deal, but they have to be enforceable. They have to be verifiable. They have to be enduring.
Do you want to go first, or should I?
No, go ahead, fam. I wanted your opinion on it.
So you're looking at it as, he looks like the sensible person here, which he does. But the thing is that I don't take anything that people like Rubio or Trump say at like face value, right? Like they are doing this because it is the most strategically, politically advantageous thing to do based on the things they are allowed to do right now. And what's advantageous for them is to end this war, which is why you see Rubio shift his perspective on how he was talking about Putin 3 years ago to how he's talking about Putin now, because the strategy has changed. Now we're not going to just go at Russia when we know, wait a minute, Russia has these economic things to offer. They're obviously stronger than Europe. Things like Europe is completely like the same way Iran was able to show that they can defend themselves. Russia has shown that as well. Russia has shown that they are much more powerful economically and militarily than all of Europe. And that's the reality, right? So again, I think that he's saying this because the strategy has shifted, not because of what he personally believes. And I think we need to be looking as to why that is, rather than just taking it at face value as to, oh, well, he's sensible and they want war. No, it's like they're all playing a role here. I mean, the more you have the liberals acting like warmongers, the more people are going to say, oh, at least the Republicans don't want war. And then you go to the Republicans and then, hey, it's not Russia anymore, it's Iran. Oh, the Republicans are back at being the warmongers, and the liberals are saying, no, lay off Iran. It's a game they play to continue deluding people into thinking they're any different. But the reality is you have to look at why things are being said at the moment they're being said. Yeah. And that's what I think escapes people the most.
So Putin agreed to let U.S. Europe offer NATO-style protections for Ukraine. Trump envoy says, does that mean that...
Oh, you're muted.
Does that mean that that they've... Hold on. Does this mean that Trump, that Putin is kind of giving up a little bit more than he's wanted to, that he's bending the knee a little bit? Because...
We don't know.
Yeah. Please explain.
I was just going to say, we don't know that this is not confirmed. What this is, NPR stating that, I'm sorry, not NPR, CBS stating that this was said by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff on Sunday. So they said that this happened. And they stated Vladimir Putin agreed at his summit with President Trump to allow the U.S. and its European allies to offer Ukraine a security guarantee resembling NATO's collective defense mandate as part of an eventual deal to end the 3.5-year war in Ukraine. Special U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff said on Sunday. We don't have confirmation that he said it or not, but is it plausible? I think it's plausible because it doesn't mean that Ukraine is a part of NATO, because the wording on all these things is very specific, that they would have security guarantees. And Putin did say that he hoped he could usher in security guarantees for Ukraine, that was what he was willing to give. Yeah. So if the security guarantees resemble NATO's collective defense mandate, what does that mean? Is it entry into NATO? No. Is it, what is it? Like, we would have to hear more specifics on what that would be, but it's not an admission into NATO. Yeah. And, he said we were able to win the following concession, that the United States could offer Article 5-like protection, which is one of the real reasons why Ukraine wants to be in NATO. He added that it was the first time we had ever heard the Russians agree to that and called it game-changing. Yes, I believe it is the first time Russia has said something like that. And everything they've always talked about, security guarantees, keeping the territories, Donbass, Lugansk, etc. And also Crimea, of course, isn't up for discussion, and Ukraine cannot join NATO. But we haven't heard Russia ever discuss this. And the only reason I think that they would even put this on the table is because they're not afraid of Europe doing anything at all. And I think that there would have to be some sort of guarantee that nothing would occur against Russia. And I think believing in anything the United States is absolute lunacy. But if they feel confident through some sort of deal that they would work out with the US, some sort of economic partnership, where if the US, for example, attacked Russia, it would also hurt them, right? Economically, I think that's the way Russia's doing it. And looking at it from that point of view, the pragmatic realpolitik strategy aspect of it, I think that's genius. Because if you look at China and what they've done with the United States, they've intrinsically tied the U.S. economy to theirs. So the U.S. is very reliant on China for the economy. And Russia's trying to sort of finagle something like this, I think, too, but just more so in the region. And they have the upper hand. They have the military. They have the power to do it now. They may not have done it before, but now things have changed and they're sort of coming into this very confidently. Whereas I think the U.S. is actually more so kind of the ones that are giving in to what Russia is asking for, because Russia's ultimately the victor in this war.
But isn't there some truth to the fact that if Russia doesn't cut a deal right now, keep the Donbass regions and Crimea, make some type of ceasefire, some agreement where they can join NATO, the United States agrees to stop sending weapons, whatever the case may be, isn't that like a necessity for Russia? Because if they don't, they'd have to take the whole country, and taking the whole country would just justify the West to put more and pump more money into NATO and have endless war with Russia. Isn't there a desire and a need just because he doesn't want to take the whole country?
I mean, I don't think Putin wants to take the whole country. I don't think that's their prerogative. I think their prerogative, like their whole reason for doing this was to make sure that they denazified Ukraine, that they pushed these people out, that Ukraine wasn't a part of NATO, that they had their security guarantees respected. I don't think Russia wants to take over Ukraine. I don't think they need to. I mean, just
I don't think they want to either, but I'm saying if they don't get some type of deal, isn't there no choice, but they're going to have to do that?
Why would they need to take all of Ukraine?
With the West, or they're going to have to take the whole country.
But why would they have to take the whole country? They could just continue advancing.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you keep advancing, that means you're going to have to take the whole country. They're starting to move outside the Donbass and push towards Kiev, right? And if they're going to take Odessa, you're going to probably have to take Kiev first because it's north, unless you're planning to take it by sea or paratrooper a lot of people into Odessa. It seems like the Russian citizens will never be safe with this government in play unless this government has a leash on them by the West,
which they do. Yeah. So they don't necessarily need to take it because, and this is why
that's what I'm saying. They need the deal instead, right?
Well, I think they want the deal. I don't necessarily think they need it. I think that the U.S. needs the deal more. That's my opinion. I think the U.S. needs the deal more. I think Russia could continue to do it, but I think that Russia wants the deal. And I think a lot of people misjudge that, saying like they don't want it, they don't need it. I think you're right to a degree. It would be beneficial for them to make a deal now, because then they can set the terms. They don't look like they're like they want to take everything over. But at the end of the day, Russia never operates because of what X entity might think of them. They don't really care what Europe thinks of them. If they think that Putin is Hitler, like that's irrelevant for them. They're looking at what's the reality on the ground, what's going on, what we can get out of this. They don't care about PR. I mean, they're terrible propaganda. They've gotten better, I will say, but they're still not. They don't operate like PR wise like that. That's not how they operate. So
Let me continue just to add this last little nugget here. And fam, I do have a heart out in a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of play the way the media is acting, right? So you see Welker over there. There was another quote of her going to Rubio. How come you haven't put more sanctions on? How come Trump hasn't put more sanctions on Putin, right? You know what I'm saying? It's just constantly throw sanctions on him, punish him, oppose him. World War III is the starting point for the Democratic Party. But the way that people kind of demonize Putin simply just to own Donald Trump is disgusting. This is Anthony Scaramucci, this guy, obviously he was let down by Donald Trump, and he's acted like a battered wife ever since, he's got let go by Donald Trump. But watch the way he describes Russians. It's disgusting to me. This is Anthony Scaramucci.
demography, 25% unemployment, high alcoholism. The economy has shrunk in 14% in 3 years. It's below the GDP of Italy, but I'm still having my ass kissed by the president of the United States. Maybe Putin's phone is going off with the ass kissing alert from Donald Trump. Maybe that's happening. Okay, but I'm just letting you know they got something on the boy, because if they didn't, this dynamic wouldn't be happening. I'm in a failed oil and gas state with an upside down demography, 25% unemployment, high alcoholism.
So
I had to just show that Russophobia of the high alcoholism. Like Russians are just nothing more than fall down drunks like Boris Yeltsin, fam. Let me tell you something. The American left who claims that the right is racist, they're racist too.
But that's not even
racism. Period.
He's a leftist? I don't think so.
Well, I mean, he's with the Democrats now, and the Democrats repeat the same shit too as well. The Democrats are Russophobic. He's like Nicole Wallace. Now he's going on all the old Democrat channels.
I think there is an element of that to it, 100%. But I think it's more of just like the line that they've tied themselves to, and that they're not changing from that, right? They're just not gonna change. And it's so funny, people always classify Russians as alcoholics. They don't really drink that much here. I think that the younger generation saw that stigma, and they've shifted. I mean, I've been here now 3 years, and I think once you're here 3 years and up, you can start really understanding the dynamics of what's put out in media, even in Russian media, and then what's the reality, and what's put out in Western media, and what's the reality. It falls somewhere in the middle. Like I see Americans as far more alcoholics than any Russians. They like wine here.
It's just ridiculous the way they painted this whole picture. You know what I'm saying? And the lies about the economics. The ruble has grown. It's been the fastest growing currency out there right now. The GDP of Russia shot through the roof. They understand that they own a lot of the resources. They got 11 time zones, right? They got a large landmass with everything they need. That these sanctions really kind of were counterproductive. They didn't work the way they thought they would work. Trump is holding a meeting with Zelensky today in the Oval Office. How do you think that's going to go? Or is this more like just kind of what you've been telling us as far as, they're going to let them know what they're going to have to do, and that's that.
Yeah, no, I mean, so Russia wouldn't have had this conversation with Trump if they were weak. Like Scaramucci said, that would have never happened. And so what I think is going to happen is the opposite. We know who the weak one is. It's Europe, NATO, and Ukraine. And so the conversation, I think, is going to go, you need to accept these terms or else. And I think that's ultimately what I think we're going to see. Whether, are we going to have the theater of Zelensky saying no and Zelensky saying, nah, I'm not going to do this and blah, blah, blah. Of course, we're going to have that. We're going to have Europe come to their defense. They've already stated they're going to sanction Russia. This is normal for them, I think. But yeah, I mean, that's what's going to happen. I think that while this is ongoing, these talks are ongoing, the war is still ongoing, right? So you have Russia and Ukraine still pretty much striking one another. Particularly, of course, Ukraine has been attacking once again the Belgorod region this weekend and killing civilians. But again, all those people never talk about that, in that aspect. But yeah, there's so much more to talk about all of this. But yeah, I just want to say that I do think that ultimately Trump's maneuver with Zelensky is going to be like, all right, we're just going to pull away. He already backed off the tariffs from Russia, by the way, when it comes to I don't think it was India, but everybody else. He said, yeah, we're backing off the tariffs now because they genuinely see Russia as someone they want to make a deal with.
That's it. That was empty promises. And Donald Trump looked so stupid, when he said those things. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to punish your friends? Fam, this is the last thing I think you had in the folder here. Zelensky's being coddled by a weakened NATO.
Yeah.
As he preps to meet Trump, but he's actually contradicting himself, saying Ukraine's constitution prevents him from giving up territories, fam. Did the Constitution, his Constitution say that he had to have an election last year that he ignored? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we don't need to play it, but yeah, he's contradicting himself. So now the Constitution is valid. before it wasn't. You know, he's not supposed to be there. I think Zelensky's on his way out, especially if he decides to go against what the deep state wants, which is clearly they want to shelf this, at least for now. I think that's their aim. So.
Yeah. Fam, I did have something that I wanted to show real quick. Hold on. Let me get this here real quick. This is interesting. Let me see if I can get it back up. Okay, yeah. So just so we know, I've been seeing a lot of this lately, and it's really scary. Let me see if I could redo this real quick. They're already getting prepared, fam, to get their chosen candidate. It looks like they really are going to go with Gavin Newsom. I've seen an influx of Gavin Newsom stuff on the reg, fam. I just want to let everybody out there who watches the show, we've been watching a lot of the stuff we do, be prepared because they're going to hype up the Gavin Newsom train. It seems like he is the chosen one for sure. I'm sensing you'll see an AOC Gavin Newsom ticket, but you know, it seems like they're just getting ready to do the same thing they've always done, team sports at its highest level, and they're going to continue to push this right now as they go after Donald Trump. So it's interesting, you know, the whole taking the, I don't know if you heard what he did in DC, and now he's wanting to have a task force that's going to be ready to take care of the citizenry, you know, so they can be deployed quickly to go after and quell the citizens. So even though you have him, you know, where there are some positive things, no representation. You've been talking about your boy all day long here on the chat, making him look really good and pointing out these great points. There's a lot of negatives that come with it. And this is the problem here, because as he does one thing good, the base will get behind him. He's awesome. He's the peace president. He negotiated a war that Biden stopped, that Biden started. Donald Trump ended it. He said he ended 5 wars, and they're just making these things up, right? Like, you know, 5 wars. Well, I can't remember one he ended. But short story long, now he's overreaching it was with his authoritarian powers in DC and talking about some real fascist shit.
I definitely want to talk about that.
The 4th Industrial Revolution is here, and Donald Trump has ushered them in quite quickly. Final thoughts.
If you guys saw Donald Trump's big beautiful bill, and then after several other things that happened with Palantir and DARPA and all these other Silicon Valley tech companies, and now you're seeing what he's doing in DC, you can already spot the trend of what's to happen. And yeah, it's bad.
It's a lot of bad things. That's it for today, fam. I got to get on out of here, guys. Remember, Wednesday we'll be back here on the TruthWire around the same time. I don't think Fam will be with us. I think Matt will be with us. We'll have Gerald Celente. But Fam will return on Friday as we have Karen Kwiatkowski and then Edwin DeJesus. Edwin DeJesus, if you haven't seen him, he was part of the medical freedom movement from the left. He was like one of us. You know, he followed Walker Bragman in New York during, remember those the Medicare for All marches, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, Edwin DeJesus has been coming in and giving us some kind of updates what's going on in New York. He actually spoke at a lot of hearings for people who lost their jobs because they didn't want to take the shot. He was out there voicing his opinion for them and fighting for them, and he's got an eye on what's going on. And as soon as I was on the radio talking about Mamdani, he kind of sent me the tweet where Mamdani said that he wouldn't hire people back that got fired for not wanting to take a shot. And he sounded like a Pfizer representative, Mamdani did. And Edwin DeJesus will be here to update us on that stuff. Karen Kwiatkowski, Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, she goes on Judge Knapp all the time. Fam, I think we're going to have a great show with her. So she'll be here on Friday. Gerald Celente Wednesday, and also my show on Wednesday night. I hope it's going to be on. I think my engineer is having the week off. He's on vacation. So I don't know how it's going to work out. So I might not have a show Wednesday on WBAI, but I always have that drive time show, and it's great. So come check that out. And Thursday, I'll be on for a little bit with Matt Weinglass on the homeless lift as he comes back from assignment. Fam, we got a lot of things to talk about. Maybe on Friday, if we can get some Bolivia stuff, get some updates. I see Camilla's out there, Saskatchewan News, reporting on there's a lot of shit going on. So we got to get you guys caught up on that stuff. For Fiorella Isabel, I am Pasta Jardula, and Jamie Cheese Slice, who's not with us today. We love him. He's taking care of some family issues. We love you, buddy. Have a great day. Thank you guys so much for hanging on out. Fam, any final last words?
Yeah, I will have a new episode of Critical Perspectives up either tomorrow or Wednesday, so check that out as well. And on my Substack coming up.
That's awesome. We love you guys. Truth out. We'll see you next time.